world's richest country is also the most unequal country on the planet. Today, average American workers have way less power relative to the corporations, the investors, and the institutions that rule our society than at any other point in the history of our nation. Wealth has never been so highly concentrated, and those who don't have it are forced to fight for their right to exist in a country where social mobility is almost non-existent. Over the past several decades, the ultra-rich have been rigging the same so that more and more money continues to be funneled into their pockets. The biggest, meanest concentrations of wealth are devouring everyone else's, with a big help from government policies. Since the foundation of America, capitalism has come to mean something completely different. It was supposed to be about the empowerment of individuals and families and small businesses. Instead, it has become a system of exploitation. We have actually been left with corporatism, which produces a handful of winners and a whole lot of losers. But when wealth and power are so highly concentrated, economic rewards are doomed to flow only to the hands of the few. Today, we have brought you some stunning numbers that expose the true extent of income and wealth inequality in our country. But before checking this list, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our future videos. Without further ado, here are 25 facts about inequality in America that will blow your mind. 1. In the United States, the income gap between the wealthy and the rest of the population has been significantly growing by every major statistical measure for more than 3 decades. According to an analysis of data gathered by the Institute for Policy Studies and published by Inequality.org, among the 100 largest low-wage employers in the country, the average CEO pay rose 19% in 2020 to $15.3 million, while the average worker pay at those companies remained stagnant at $28,187 a year. 2. The analysis also found that more than half of the 100 largest low-wage employers in the U.S. have rigged their own rules to inflate CEO pay. Their policies have protected top executives' huge bonuses, while the workers felt the financial impact of the health crisis-induced recession over the past 2 years. Among these rule-rigging corporations, the ratio between CEO and median worker pay averaged 830 to 1. 3. According to data analyzed by UC Berkeley economist Emmanuel Setz, disparities are so striking that America's top 10% income earners now average more than 9 times as much income as the bottom 90%. 4. On the same note, Americans in the top 1% tower shockingly higher. They average over 39 times more income than the bottom 90%. 5. However, that gap pales to nothing compared to the disparity between the nation's top 0.1% and the bottom 90%. Ultra-rich Americans are taking in over 196 times the income of everyone else. 6. Over the past 50 years, the top 1% of American earners have nearly doubled their share of national income. Setz' analysis shows, during the same period, the official poverty rate for all U.S. families has barely budged. 7. The official poverty rate understates the number of people in the world's wealthiest country who struggle to make ends meet. An estimated 40% of the total U.S. population, which represents about 140 million people, are either poor or low income. 8. The difference between the wealth of the top 1% is huge, even when compared to the wealth of the top 20%. The ultra-rich take home a disproportionate amount of income compared to even the nation's highest fifth of earners. CBO data reveals that the top 1% earns 93 times as much as the bottom 20%. 9. Over the past decade, paychecks at the top have skyrocketed while flatlining at the bottom. The bottom 90% have seen their wages grow by a mere 8.7%, compared to 20.4% for the top 1% and 30.2% for the top 0.1%. 10. On the other hand, while the national productivity rate has increased at a relatively consistent rate since 1948, the wages of American workers have not. In fact, from 1980 to 2020, worker hourly compensation increased by just 17%, while worker productivity rose 72% over the same period. 11. By contrast, since 1985, the average Wall Street bonus has shot up by 1,217%, from $13,970 to $184,000. Had the minimum wage increased at the same rate, it would now be worth $44.12 instead of $7.25. 12. The total bonus pool for 182,100 New York City-based Wall Street employees was $31.7 billion last year. That amount of bonus could pay for more than 1 million jobs paying $15 per hour for an entire year. 13. Ever since U.S. unions have started playing a smaller economic role, the disparity between worker and CEO pay has exploded. In 1980, the average big company CEO earned just 42 times as much as the average U.S. worker. Since the turn of the century, the annual gap between CEO pay and typical worker pay has averaged about 350 to 1. 14. According to the latest Executive Excess Report, in 2021, 50 major companies reported CEO pay 1,000% larger than worker pay. Those companies include Walmart, McDonald's, and many other highly profitable corporations. 15. Meanwhile, U.S. restaurant servers and other tipped workers haven't gotten a raise in 30 years. While CEO salaries went up by 528.5% since 1992, Congress has not passed a raise in the minimum wage for more than a decade. 16. According to the Forbes list of 400 richest Americans, 3 men own as much money as the bottom 50%, with an estimated net worth of $114, $106, and $81 billion respectively. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett held fortunes worth more than the total wealth of the poorest half of Americans, which is estimated at $255 billion. 17. As the U.S. top 0.01% have accumulated more wealth, they have paid a smaller share of total U.S. taxes. In 2018, the tax share of the top 0.01% was almost the same amount that it was in 1953. However, their share of the nation's wealth nearly quadrupled during that period, jumping from 2.5% to 9.6%. 18. Over the past 3 decades, America's most affluent families have added almost $60 billion to their net worth, while those on the bottom have fallen into negative wealth, which means that the value of their debts exceeds the value of their assets, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research data. 19. While the richest 1% holds more than 50% of the stocks and less than 5% of the debt in the U.S., most of the wealth of Americans in the bottom 90% comes from their homes. And Americans also hold just around 3/4 of America's debt. 20. While low-income workers were laid off at breathtaking rates during the peak of the virus health crisis, the ultra-rich have seen their fortunes expand dramatically. Between March and December 2020, the combined wealth of all U.S. billionaires increased by more than $1 trillion to a total of $4 trillion. 21. As a comparison, while the yearly worker pay rose on average $300 over the past 24 months, Elon Musk's net worth increased by about $100 billion during the same period. Jeff Bezos' fortune grew by almost $70 billion. 22. If the income of the bottom 90% of Americans had kept up with GDP growth, they would have collectively taken home $2.5 trillion more in 2020. Over the 47 years since 1975 combined, the figure is $47 trillion. 23. Conversely, the average American consumer has seen their share of their expenditures spent on health doubling from 1980 to 2020. According to the Institute for Policy Studies, that has led half of U.S. adults with lower incomes to skip necessary medical health care such as doctor visits, recommended tests, treatments, follow-up care, or prescription medications in the past year. 24. Today, 1 in 4 Americans have no retirement savings whatsoever. And amongst those who do, the amount they're saving is not enough. The study notes that the median retirement savings account of $120,000 for those approaching retirement with ages 55 to 64 will likely provide less than $1,000 per month over a 15-year retirement span. To make things worse, over the past 22 years, Social Security benefits have lost 30% of their buying power. 25. Even though inequality is a global phenomenon, the U.S. does not fare well, even when compared to other developed countries. The United States currently holds the largest share of the world's wealth, or around 30%. However, studies suggest that the United States has the highest level of wealth inequality and the highest levels of income inequality amongst other developed nations. Now, can you even imagine the amount of power, of money, and influence big corporations have compared to average Americans? Corporate giants are so powerful, it's virtually impossible for small businesses to directly compete with them. Many of these institutions have become so big that the global economy literally cannot afford for them to fail. A handful of corporate bureaucrats control approximately 90% of the world's trade. So what happens if those companies collapse? By contrast, average workers are, of course, never too big to fail. Big banks and large companies can always ask for bailouts, but hey, if you're late on your debt payments, you can be thrown out on the street. Or worse, you can be chucked into prison. The numbers that we have exposed today are absolute proof that our system has become corrupted beyond all recognition. Now, more than ever, it is time for Americans to start recognizing their worth and start to think how we are going to take power back to our hands.